Well, listeners, this is the final episode of Teaching Through Emotions' second season. I want to take this opportunity to thank you for listening. And a huge thank you to those of you who have written a review of the podcast. It is so helpful. Season 2 has been really fun. We've inaugurated a whole new format that's interactive and therefore quite lively. It's been a steep learning curve for me, but Joe Johnson is an awesome co-host, and the people I've interviewed have been so kind and smart and forthcoming that this scary approach is starting to feel natural. Speaking of which, today I'm interviewing a podcasting pro, Charles Fournier, the creator of an award-winning podcast called Those Who Can't Teach Anymore. We talk about why teachers are quitting. As Charles says, it's very nuanced. And thank God, why teachers stay. I recommend the interview as well as the podcast. You are in luck because even though season 2 of TTE is ending with this episode, I'm going to be dropping episodes from other education-related podcasts I enjoy during my and your summer hiatus. The first of these is, you guessed it, a really interesting episode from Charles's Those Who Can't Teach Anymore. It drops on July 10th, so look for it. And don't worry, Teaching Through Emotions will return in the fall. Season 3 is in production as we speak. We've got some great stories to tell, amazing people to interview, and interesting bonus offerings for those of you who are paid subscribers. Just a plug for the paid subscriber option. I got to do it. As a paid subscriber, you'll get bonus episodes and other goodies, as well as deep satisfaction, bottomless, self-congratulatory pride that you're supporting our work. We are an independent podcast, and the only way we can make this work is with your help. Truth is, you can sign up to be a paid subscriber right now on my Substack, where I regularly post both podcasts and blog posts about teaching, about being better, and about my personal favorite, fucking people. What's not to love? In short, there's a lot going on. Until next season, then, interesting podcast episodes will continue to drop, and I will continue to write my, I hope, helpful and sometimes slightly obnoxious posts about real people in real relationships. Remember, you can always drop a review to give me some feedback. It's very important to me. Let me know what you enjoy about the posts in the show, what you don't enjoy, what you'd like to stay the same, what you'd like to see changed. And since we're wrapping up this season, what was your favorite moment or guest or takeaway from it? I want to know. Share it all in a review on whatever podcast app you listen on. Now let's get into it.
When this started, I confess I did not understand. I guess maybe that's how it all turned out to be. Well, such a mess.
You a teacher? Got emotions? Got a lot of emotions that overwhelm you? That threaten to burn you out? Good, because this podcast is about transforming those emotions. The emotions that come with teaching, no matter how talented, experienced, or mature you are. Because classrooms these days can be such a mess, worse than you've ever seen before. We're tempted to treat the emotions that go with such messes as problems, feelings to ignore or numb out or rail against or blame ourselves for having. Wrong. These emotions are pure gold, if you know how to read them and transform them into wisdom and focused, effective action. Think of this as the teacher's lounge you have wanted and deserved your entire teaching life. Join my co-host, Joe Johnson, and me to hear stories about and interviews with teachers who thought nothing would ever change, but when they learned how to teach through their emotions, discovered just how easy change can be. In fact, it's amazing. Welcome to Teaching Through Emotions. I'm Betsy Burris. Let's get started. Today is an interview day. I am really thrilled to be talking with Charles Fournier, who is the founder, producer, writer of Those Who Can't Teach Anymore, which is a fantastic podcast about teachers who can't stay in the profession. And we all know why. But he really does a beautiful job of uncovering. I should say that anybody out there who's listening who hasn't stayed in the profession knows why you haven't stayed. But you, Charles, do a beautiful job of, I feel like it's uncovering the landscape of the world that teachers live in and why they might find it completely untenable. It's just a really wonderful podcast, and I highly recommend it. And so we're going to be talking about that a little bit today. Charles, thank you for joining me.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to get to talk with you.
Yippee. Okay, so first question is, well, tell us about yourself. What brought you to even making a podcast about teaching?
Yeah, well, getting into podcasting started as when I was a high school English teacher. I wanted to make writing more authentic, and I thought having a product that was like radio or podcasting would be interesting. And I had friends that worked at Wyoming Public Radio. And so I said, hey, can I come sit in on a session and see what you do? And so I went to an editing session, and at the end of it, they asked me, hey, do you have any feedback? So I gave them what I noticed from, my observations, and they said, oh, that was great. Would you like to edit with us? And so I was on, it's a podcast called Human Nature. So I helped edit for a little while. And then the next season they said, hey, do you want to produce some episodes and maybe get paid? And I was like, well, yeah. And then after Human Nature ended, because the two hosts who were brilliant ended up going to separate jobs, I got adopted by my current editor, who is the podcast Modern West. She said, hey, do you want to come work for me and do sound design? And so I went to Wyoming Public Radio to learn, and I just didn't leave. And I ended up with a broadcast for Friday nights and some other things just because I'd slowly try to pick it up. And I took all that to the classroom and, taught podcasting to my students and radio and how to make writing more authentic. And so that was my entrance into radio podcasting. But for this particular show, kind of in the middle of that, my wife left teaching. She had taught for 7 years, and a lot of things, a lot of circumstances led up to us or her deciding to leave and go get her pharmacy degree. And, when you have two teachers in the home, all of our conversation was around education. And so when she was leaving, it was trying to think about, okay, so why are you leaving and what do we noticed? And I feel like there was a very specific time we were watching the show called, I think, Mr. Gormand. It's a Joseph Gordon-Levitt show about a teacher. And it was the first time I ever saw a show with a teacher who had panic attacks as he was walking to school and the anxiety of it. And I really loved that part, but he was still, teaching was like a last choice. He fell into teaching. He didn't want to be a teacher. And so Jenny, and I think so many of these ideas, Jenny kind of is the catalyst. She said, why is it that in shows, teachers are either heroes or they're slobs? And it's always a last ditch thing. And so I kind of wanted to do a podcast about why teachers leave, but that comment made me think, oh my God, what are all the different things? And through conversations with my wife and other teachers about what are all the contributing factors? And so we're looking at history, we're looking at pop culture, we're looking at politics. There's so many things that contribute to the landscape of education. Yeah. And all of those then contribute to why teachers maybe decide to leave.
So just to back up for a second, I think in one of your episodes, you mentioned that you were a journalism major. Is that correct?
No, I was English. So journalism, I just kind of stumbled in. Yeah, I got my secondary English education degree, my bachelor's, and then I went back for literature. And I just had really good friends that were in journalism. And I've always been really fascinated by journalists and inspired by them because they're doing good work. Yeah. And having those friends, I felt like the little brother being like, hey, can I come hang out with you guys? And everyone was so gracious in that world to help me. And I learned a lot from them.
Okay. So you have one season of those who can't teach anymore. And then you have a new season, which is very different. Yeah. Yes. But you're learning a lot about teachers at all different levels and why they are leaving. Can you summarize what you've learned?
Yeah, and there's no one thing. There's a lot of nuance to why folks leave. Kind of the overarching, I think, idea that can cover a lot of the various reasons is just respect. And I think a culture that is turning more and more anti-intellectual. And so there's I don't want to say a fear, but there's a trepidation when thinking about teachers as experts. And so with that lack of respect that comes not getting paid well, comes being overworked, and that work not being seen as, valid work, the expertise and being questioned all the time, being blamed for the woes of society without actually getting the support to help, address those issues. And student behavior. This next season, I'm hearing more and more about student behavior. And I had that experience too. I was, the last couple of years of my teaching in the high school setting, I got cussed out more than I ever had. In the previous 9, I broke up more fights than I'd ever had. And so just, schools are a microcosm of society and all of that seeping in, the culture of violence, the culture of disrespect. And that's really hard. So teachers are feeling parts of those. Some are, more thinking about I wish I was paid more. I wish I was paid for what I was doing. Or I'm afraid for my well-being. And, I've had several friends that are queer that are in the profession that either one, don't want to be outed or are moving states because they're going to be safer somewhere else. And so, there are these things that, it's going to be different per teacher. But I think respect and just the kindness is maybe at the heart or like the overarching idea.
Mm. It's so interesting. You're making me think. I think a lot about psychodynamics, and I'm really interested in how we objectify human beings. I mean, that's been going on
Hmm.
forever, but
Right.
these days, everyone is objectified. And when you're describing teachers as not being respected as real people, as actual
Yeah.
people with intelligence, with expertise, with foibles, with strengths, it makes a profession untenable. When you become an
Hmm.
object for other people's, as you say, blame, there's also this major blame game going on just nationally where everyone's
Right.
blaming everybody else. It's a it is weird to think of education as being the repository of all that bad behavior that is being, I think, endorsed and modeled at the
Right.
highest levels of our society now.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think like when you're saying the objectification, I feel like, it's a binary of how folks are being objectified. You're either a saint, and so with sainthood becomes
Nice.
martyrdom, where there's an expectation that you have to give all of yourself to education to the point where, Freedom Riders, I really love that movie. I really liked that as a student growing up, but as I got older, and this was a conversation with my wife too, we're like, I kind of miss the fact that the main character, who is the martyr, who's the great teacher, her husband left her because she was so tied to her job. And like to me, my relationship with my wife matters more than my job ever will.
Yep. Yep.
And then you have the flip of that where you're either that martyr or you're a slob, where
Mm.
you're a Jack Black character, where you're just, this is a scam to go through and, get snacks from the kids and make a rock band,
Yeah, right.
and
Exactly.
there's no happy medium. And I think that objectification doesn't allow for humanity. And so we're not seeing teachers as human and imperfect and just trying their best. Yeah, that binary thinking is really, I think, really hurting how
And it's
teachers are being treated.
fantasy. It's just
Oh, it
fantasy.
is.
It's also making me think of the kind of gendered charges to those endpoints of the binary, that
Yeah.
women are the ones who tend to be the martyrs, although those are probably the ones depicted in movies. The martyrs depicted in movies are probably women, and the slobs
Mhm.
depicted in movies are probably charming, adorable people like Jack Black. I
Right.
love School of Rock.
Yeah.
So it's interesting to think about the gendered nature here too, and that makes me think about. I'm sorry I'm just so interested in the things that you're discovering and saying. This anti-intellectualism and specifically rejection of the notion that teachers have expertise, that teachers are experts in anything at all, is,
Right.
I mean, that's a very concrete and real version of the anti-intellectualism that we can all kind of point to, like, oh, smart people or educated people are elite, whatever. But teachers, you're not even going to let teachers know how to teach? What's that all about? What do you think that's about?
Oh, man. I think, like, looking historically, well, one, I taught Fahrenheit 451, and Ray Bradbury predicted this. There's a whole speech that Captain Beatty gives. He's like, okay, essentially there's a movement towards anti-intellectualism, and there's a fear of that because nobody wants to be made less than. And so, having taught that book, I want to say I've read it like 35 times because I've taught it so many times.
Mm,
There's this really interesting, oh my God, like he predicted it. But then looking historically, I think there's been an effort to kind of subvert education. And
mm.
you have like in the space race, there is a critique of education. And so there is a shift towards, mathematics and science. And then in the early 80s, you have the Nation at Risk document that comes out that is, undercutting what is going on in education. And you have that shift towards standardization. And Reagan had kind of this idea that if he can come in and privatize education, and so a lot of the things that we're seeing right now are just Reagan's ideas being brought to fruition, where money is being pulled from public education, and part of that funding is going to, private education and getting rid of maybe the Department of Education, which was fairly new when Reagan was in office.
Mhm,
But
mhm.
I think what we're seeing is with some of the shifts in standardization, where we have No Child Left Behind, all those other iterations of what Reagan was kind of getting established, you have an undercutting of education. And I don't want to feel like, oh, conspiracy, but I think there is an effort to, if we can seed distrust in what's going on in education
Mm.
by, with No Child Left Behind, for example, we need 100% proficiency across the
Yeah,
board by,
yeah,
it was like 2011, 2014. And that's never going to be
yeah,
possible. Or you're lowering the bar to a point where education doesn't mean anything. And so when
yeah.
you have students that, like one of the schools that I taught in, we had a program with students with severe disability. And the thought of 100% proficiency is
Mm.
including a lot of these students. And so it's disregarding diversity, it's disregarding, the abilities of students. And so with all that, we are getting that undercurrent, that is saying, oh, teachers are failing because we're not meeting these expectations. And so I think some of that is maybe intentional. Some of it is just a byproduct of other goals that were occurring within, I don't know, legislation and politics.
That have nothing to do with education per se.
Right.
So, I mean, I love that explanation. It makes a lot of sense to me. And I don't want to promote anything with the word conspiracy in it, but there
Oh, yeah,
is,
absolutely.
as you don't, I know, but there is a traceable element of policy that maneuvers and manipulates education as just as a means of getting to all people because everyone goes through it. I'm also really alert to the fact that local people get to vote on an education budget where they don't get to vote on, a federal budget. So there's the power,
Right.
there's a kind of conflict or competition going on among stakeholders that, in a democracy, in a true diverse society, even if it's not a democracy, how do we reconcile all those different needs and perspectives? We've been doing it for a century or so, and now it
Mhm.
seems to be falling apart, right?
No, and I think that's really tough. Because I feel like standardization nationally helped with the populations that weren't maybe getting an equitable education. And I think
Right.
that's really important.
Right.
But then on the other side, you're getting education that is not localized and it's kind of disregarding the community. And I think this is a really hard balance, and I don't have an answer. I have a teacher friend that works on the Wind River Reservation. She's Arapaho. Her students are mostly Arapaho, and I guess Shoshone too. But in her work, she's focusing on, creation stories. She's teaching GIS by looking at treaties and looking at maps and saying like, okay, let's use GIS to see how the landscape has shrunk. And so she's using like things that we understand as, I don't know, like capital T truths. I think this is when we're thinking of localized, there's still science is science. There are things that
Yeah.
you can't push against. The math is the math. But if you can apply it to your local area, then that becomes way more relevant to the students. And if you can tie it to their culture, that's even better. And I think we were seeing a shift away from that. And I think for so long, education was like you had very stereotypical canon of this is what good literature is. And it's disregarding communities that are present within my class. Like, yeah, there were some really good things happening educationally where we're trying to get more equity. But we're also really missing some of the things that make it important per community, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah.
And even with something like Brown versus Board of Education, working towards having equity in there. But like a result of that decision was that like 100,000 Black educators were fired. And that's not what Brown versus Board asked for. But when you have integration of schools and you have the combination of schools, they are keeping the white teachers. And so you have like automatically kids no longer have somebody that looks like them in the classroom. And so one step forward, two steps back sort of thing. We're like, oh, look, we're making progress here, but then we're going back. And I think some of this goes to the expertise that in the age of social media, everyone's an expert because you can do your own, quote unquote research. And it's hard because there's lived experience that we're disregarding that we need to be paying attention to, but also you can't, like, facts are facts. And you can't rewrite history. You can't point to things that have been proven, say like, oh, that's not real because I've done my own research, right? Like, it's a hard balance. And again, I don't have the answer, and I feel like, hey, here's the problem, and then I'm going to step away.
Well, I mean, we're all living it, but this blurry line between facts and alternative facts or our personal facts. I love what you say about having to go local, because what you're describing, of course, are all very, very high level, up in the ether kinds of policies, and thinking about local as being a community as well as being like an individual. The kid in your class, like local goes really low, as it were. And this is what diversity really means. It doesn't mean just the cultural background. It's every kid has a cultural background, and every kid has a particular culture and strengths and weaknesses. And to be teaching to students, as teachers say, I'm teaching students, not subjects. But that is even scarier, I think. Apparently to this administration that wants diversity out of the picture, at least as they define it. But what does it mean to teach actual people who are different, even if they all, come from the same place? To me, it's the hope of education. It's the thrill of educating is the relationships that are not just implied in education, but required for any education to happen. But when we're talking about numbers and reaching 100% proficiency, and if not, we're going to take you over and we're going to replace your people with our people, as if they're replaceable, as if it's that simple, as if substitutions are that easy. It's like we've lifted off of the planet and gotten into, again, ether that doesn't make any sense at all. And how, as a teacher, do you bear it? And
Right.
so we're back to your podcast.
Yeah. I think something you said there of the folks making decisions about education want quantifiable data. And so much of
Yep.
education is unquantifiable. It's
Exactly.
hard to measure a relationship. It's hard to measure like whether a kid feels safe or not. And sure, you can have a survey for it, but also if the student doesn't know how to articulate how they're doing, what they're doing, that's a really hard thing to quantify. And so when people think of education as a business, they want numbers. They want to say, this is what they know, but it's really hard to measure what they know. And especially, I think of my friend Iva, who teaches on the reservation, what ways of knowing are overlooked. And so when her students come to the classroom, they say, oh, we don't know anything. She's like, you have all this cultural knowledge. It's just not the knowledge that they're asking you to have. And so for her, incorporating it is what's validating their ways of knowing while also saying, okay, here's maybe like a larger way to apply it. And so I think to that point, like when you have non-teachers making decisions, and sometimes even teachers, like there are teachers that are part of the problem. But when you have a politician that I interviewed that said it perfectly, he's like, when you have folks making decisions about education that could never be hired in education, that's a problem.
Exactly. I loved that line in that episode.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
Really great. I guess we've been talking about why teachers leave. What about why teachers stay? Do you have some thoughts on that?
Yeah. When I think about the teachers that are staying, one, it's a lot of middle school teachers. They're a different breed. That is a group of folks that I am always impressed.
That is so true. Me too.
Every middle school teacher that I interviewed, even ones that were trying to get out of education, in the process of interviewing, they're like, no, I love it. I got to be back in that. So when middle school teachers, you're built different. But then the teachers that otherwise, kind of like across the board, a lot of times they have a lot of support and both family support, community support. They feel valued as an educator and they feel safe in their job. What I've noticed, oftentimes those teachers have appropriate class sizes and they're able to connect with their class in terms of community and the relationships are really solid. And it helps that they're very excited about the profession. And I'm thinking more about my teachers that I've interviewed that have longevity, like they've taught for, 20 plus years. Honestly, I feel as I'm thinking of them, most of them are in small communities. And this is also interesting. And I don't know where to place this, but several of them are very religious. And so the idea of service is built into their belief system. And so feeling of service and feeling of helping the community, like that's been a trend that I've seen that is, that makes sense, right? Like you're here to help others. And it makes you feel like if society doesn't give you purpose, at least your belief system gives you that purpose.
And your belief system gives you support.
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
I mean, you
absolutely.
actually have a power that you trust is holding you, right? I envy people who have that sense of being loved, right?
Yeah.
Being loved. It's crucial.
Like when asking those folks about pay doesn't matter. Because I've asked some of them pointedly, so like, do you feel like you need to be paid more? They're like, no, like that's part of the service. And again, that brings in martyrdom, sainthood, all that again. And I'm not saying to last you need to be religious, but I think we can really reflect on that and maybe deconstruct that idea of why is it that these folks feel like there's more longevity for them? And I think that's important.
First of all, I feel as though teachers who are happy teaching probably feel less connected to the need for a pay boost, right?
Yeah.
It's like, I'm doing this because I love it. And you know what? I don't even notice that, assuming you don't desperately need the paycheck.
And
the other thing I want to say is I really love the idea that human beings, whether we're religious or not, are vehicles for the divine. And I believe that education is a place, and there are other places too, but education is a place where if you can channel the divine, however you understand it, then you are in a better shape to support others in channeling the divine, and to connect with your students, to see the divine in them. And when you see the divine in other people, you're seeing them wholly. You're not seeing them as numbers or strengths even, or weaknesses, or you're feeling them and connecting with them in ways that are loving and caring and real. Like, I see what's good in you, but I also see what's not good in you. And I'm going to let you know. I'm going to tell you, look, that sucked right there. Or you didn't do very well on this paper. Let's talk about that. It's not like just, oh, let's just love everybody. That's not it. It's actually being human with each other and recognizing that there are all kinds of forces at work in a human body. And if we can notice them and acknowledge and work with them, then we have better chances of having the relationships in classrooms that actually lead to learning and growth, personal growth and development.
You made me remember one of the things that some of the other folks I've taught with and had great relationships with. There are some people that really happy with education. Like there's a guy I coached with that he's like, why would anybody leave? This is the best job there is. And in his classroom, he really prioritizes relationships. That's number one always. He consistently would give me a hard time for being an English teacher and saying, man, you chose the wrong job to all that grading. And his dad was an English teacher, his brother's an English teacher. But for him, content was not high in terms of priority. For him, it was building the relationships. And this is where I've seen the conflict in terms of what's the purpose of education. And so many of the critiques are like, why aren't we just teaching curriculum? Why are you dealing with the relational piece? And then you have folks like me to a big extent, but also some of the folks I've taught with that, like, I really got into this because I like the relationships, but I really like the content. And so what's the point of education? Is it to get the content? Is it to socialize people? Is it to build those relationships? And I think because there is no clear answer to that if you ask anybody, what's the point of education? It's going to be extraordinarily different across the board. That it's hard to be happy when you think the point of education is to teach your content to get people experience and learning in this. And either one, that's not prioritized, or the structure of the classroom is such that it's not feasible because you're being a counselor, you're being a parent, you're being all these other things.
Exactly. I mean, if I'm here to teach content and some kid acts out and thwarts my goal, I'm going to get pissed and now things get nasty. You know, I think my answer to the question of what is the purpose of education is actually relationships, in that not just social relationships, but I think primarily helping students forge relationships with content, especially in an era of computers where you can get content anywhere. I can look it up. And if I don't know how to evaluate that, though, or make use of it, or criticize it, or critique it, or compare it, then I am just a lemming. So for me, great instructional design, and therefore great teaching, absolutely focuses on the line between students and content. It's not the content, it's the line between them, so that students can actually love it, hate it. Like, I'm psyched if a student hates a book that they have to read, because then they can write about that, or at least talk about that in the very terms that we need people to be thinking, in terms of evidence. Where's your evidence? Let's talk about it. I don't care how you feel. I want to know how you're thinking. So that to me is the answer. That's what teaching should be doing. And I should not care really as a teacher what a student's conclusion is, unless it's wrong. If it's wrong, it's wrong. But in a subject like English,
it's really hard to be wrong in English. Yeah.
Right? Exactly. So think well.
Right.
But what's your relationship to thinking? What's your relationship to your own ideas? What's your relationship to your right to say them? I think that is absolutely part of education, but so many teachers don't want to deal with that, especially with kids who are getting more and more difficult, many of them more and more difficult.
And I think it's becoming more and more dangerous for teachers to do it, even with difficult students. I feel like my students that were most difficult, they liked those conversations, but it's really hard to have those kind of conversations when you feel like as a teacher, you're looking over your shoulder because, legislation says, you shouldn't be talking about identity, or you shouldn't be talking about your place in the world. It's really tough,
Yeah, that is true. And that is new. I mean,
it is new.
Newish.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. The vehemence with which it's happening now is new, but it's wrong. I mean, there's so much that's been going on in education that I think has been just misapplied. The assumptions have been wrong all along. No Child Left Behind, standardization, just really uninterrogated assumptions. And now everything is just exploding. And I feel like lots of schools are kind of becoming chaotic.
It's so tough. I think being in the schools and going to schools, folks are trying so hard, but they are running ragged. Yeah. And I spoke with one of my former principals that I worked with that I had a great relationship with, and she was like, man, this year has been hard, and it's been a slog, and it's all those things. It's trying to balance the cultural stuff coming in, the students, the curriculum, legislation coming down that's impacting what and how we can teach. And it's hard. And it's in the first season, I had one of my friends named Shane Atkinson. He said when he left teaching, he had the comment, it was really nice to go into a profession that aligned with like my moral beliefs to an extent. He's like, teaching used to, but then it shifted so much where I didn't feel good about what I was doing. And that's really hard too, when I acquired so much literature based in Wyoming, about Wyoming, representing a bunch of different populations in Wyoming. And then we got to a point where I wasn't supposed to have those in my room. And so I would just kind of say like, hey, you should maybe go grab that book. And it was just because of the approvals situation, and they were coming after classroom libraries. And so that's really hard when there are books I know that students love, and not to over exaggerate, but I feel like have saved some students that they saw themselves in another person. They're like, oh, I'm not alone. And then to say, oh, like I have a friend who wrote a book called Cowboys and East Indians. Her name's Nina McConaughey. She grew up in Casper, and her mom's from India, her dad's from Ireland. And she talked about being the wrong kind of Indian in Wyoming.
Right,
and,
right.
And so talking about race and mixed race, but also loving Wyoming and being in this space and trying to carve a corner for yourself in that. I had a lot of students that loved that book, but because it's addressing race, it would have been a target had I, advertised it. But just because it was, dealing with DEI, or some people would challenge it as critical race theory, which is a whole nother thing.
Oh my God.
When we're talking about the struggles, again, it's nuanced and there's so many things to look at. But when it feels hectic right now, I think it's trying to manage, okay, what's the point of education? And how can we address as teachers what we think morally we have an obligation to when maybe we're not allowed to do that? And it's not teaching kids to be cats. That's ridiculous. It's trying to meet kids where they are and to be a safe place for them when home might not be safe, or outside in the community might not be safe. There's nothing like having a kid say, I felt safe in your room. And that is just, I'm like, oh, okay, well, hopefully I did something right then.
Yeah. Yeah. And you're not even sure what, but all these things, this being a human, again, I would say channeling the divine, making it right. Yeah. I mean, I work with teachers specifically trying to help them manage the emotions that come up for them in the classroom. I haven't talked a whole lot about the content, these kinds of restrictions on content yet with teachers. That hasn't come up, but a lot of behavior, student behavior, and mismatches between teacher level and the administrative level, which is also the administrative level feeling so much pressure from above. And I don't want to imply that the chaos of schools is anyone's fault. I'm not into that blame game at all. There's no blame in my work, but it is a reality that teachers are dealing with, and they are not necessarily prepared to deal with the kinds of behaviors that they bring to me and say, I don't even understand this. Like, what is happening? So I just want to say it out loud. I know you totally agree that you and I both love education. I care about teachers. I think teachers are crucial and need deep support in managing what is coming into the classroom these days, because those kids are manifesting their own deep concerns and problems and difficulties. Right. And they're teaching teachers who actually can see them maybe better than parents can, because parents live with them all the time. I don't know, but they're teaching teachers what's going on, what's going wrong, and what they need. And teachers, unfortunately, this may not be what they signed up for. And I don't think any teacher does, at least not for a normal public school post. They're definitely being asked to be attachment figures, or what I call developmental partners, to their students. Developmental partners meaning developing intellectually, cognitively, but also emotionally and relationally. And because it's not necessarily happening at home. And we've unfortunately, somehow created these massive petri dishes for students to act out on each other, right? Things that they haven't been taught to work out at home necessarily. And so who is going to be managing that if not teachers? But it's not what we prepare them to do at all.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
No,
and it's not just like, how do we make the students better, but how do teachers feel okay about themselves? That's a real problem. That's what I focus on, helping them figure out what to do with the students, but really to survive that and to feel like I'm still a good person, even though this kid just yelled, "Fuck you," in my face, or just walked out of my classroom and slammed the door, or, all these things that make a person, just a regular person, feel so terrible. Teachers need to have things normalized, their own responses normalized, so they don't spend their time berating themselves, eviscerating themselves. Got a teaching story you need help with, perspective on? A relationship you really need to figure out so you can sleep at night? Contact me. Call, ready? Get a pen and paper, 413-239-4158. That's 413-239-4158. Call it, leave a message, including your email address, and I'll get back to you. It's really easy.
I think it's a really hard situation too, because I feel like what you're doing is really important to be able to recognize and feel as a teacher, how do you navigate, how do you manage? And then I think on the other side too, I'm struggling with how acceptable it is becoming to essentially harass teachers and harass educators. And so there's a balance
Yes,
of where does the
exactly.
responsibility land? And like you said,
Yes.
I don't think it's any one place, but are we to a point where teachers now have to be reactionary to take care of ourselves rather than addressing
Mm,
maybe the heart of the problem, that is there is a culture that is essentially like anti-teacher that is present right now that is very difficult for teachers to endure. And
yes.
that's hard. And like having some teachers be assaulted in schools, and there's kind of this odd thing of like, oh, well, like the kid, they're having a hard
Right.
time. And it's like, but teachers are humans and they shouldn't be assaulted in their workplace.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
was not part of, like you said, what we were expecting to do.
Right.
And so I think
Right.
about like teacher rights of, shouldn't you have the right to be safe in your working environment?
Yeah.
And I think that also includes like how to manage your own emotions, your own like self-regulatory just systems to things.
Yes.
And I think there's a balance, right? And again, like
Yeah.
it's not either one or the other, it's in the gray.
Oh, I love that. And that's a big point. That's a very strong point you make in your first season, which is why are teachers expected to make this better? Right? Teachers are doing the work and are suffering from, I guess I would say home lives and parents' own failings, the trauma that I think is actually now epidemic. I think pretty
Hmm.
much every human being, at least in the United States, has been traumatized somehow. And if you don't know how to, metabolize your own trauma and get to the point where you can actually engage in healthy relationships, then you're just going to be perpetuating those uninterrogated experiences by
Right.
passing them on. And then kids come into classes. I mean, it's kind of crazy making. And you're correct. I mean, it's a very good point. I guess my feeling is I want teachers to have support. The teachers who want to stay have the
Hmm.
kind of support that will help them survive it and maybe turn things around, because the work that we do can really turn stuff around like on a dime if the conditions are right. But you're right also that things are getting so crazy and parents are getting in on the act and actually,
Yeah.
as you say, harassing. And I mean, not just kids, but parents
Hmm.
going after teachers, that it makes me think that your message in your podcast is important for teachers to hear. And that is, if you're being abused, get out of this abusive relationship. But if you can stand it, if you can stay in it, if you're not being abused, but you're being confused or
Mm.
mystified, or you're experiencing behaviors that you believe you can actually maybe manage, then get support, get the kind of support that will help you do that. But there is a difference.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure there's a balance. I feel like maybe the balance is you either get out of there or you stay and get the support you need. But if it gets beyond you and you're hurting, then
Hmm.
crazy. And in a way, that's kind of how the system is going to learn. I often say when I'm involved in organizations that are deciding, how to keep themselves alive, my thought is, well, if we're not meant to be alive, then we need to die. It's just two or three people struggling like frenetically to keep something going at their own expense, then maybe this organization needs to just return to the earth and spring up again in a different form. And I wonder if that's what we're looking at in education. It's hard to believe it's
Gosh,
such a huge monolithic structure.
it is. And I have so much hope for public education. I think it's so important. And I think there's maybe a goal from some folks that public education should collapse, because then that
Mm.
means funding goes
A
elsewhere.
goal. Mm.
And I think
Oh,
that's really
that's not
difficult.
what I mean.
But I know I also agree with like when you're struggling so much, is there a moment to let go? And man, I have a hard time. I don't disagree with you. It just kind of breaks my heart a bit. And I
Yeah.
think, it's cool seeing situations or pockets of good things happening where
Yes.
they're reimagining what the classroom or public education can look like. And it's almost all community based.
Yeah.
Did you ever get to go to Cody, Wyoming in the Northwest?
I'm not sure. I don't
It's,
think I did. Maybe, but I
it,
don't remember.
it's in the mountains, in the Bighorns. They got a river running through. And I met with a few teachers out of that school that are, I think it's an English teacher, a PE teacher, and a science teacher, all were collaborating on like these river raft trips. And so they were collecting samples, they were learning how to raft, they were learning how to read the river. They were thinking about tourism in the area because tourism is such a big part of their community. And they're reading, texts that are tied to environment and nature. And so
Mm.
there are pockets where this is happening that are
Yes.
outside of private schools. I mean, like the
Yeah.
Teton Science School up in Northwest Wyoming is amazing. They do amazing things,
Wow.
but it's also not a public school. And I
Yes.
think, taking some of those ideas and how do we make it accessible to everyone? How do we make it
Yeah.
accessible to all the groups? And my friend Iva from the Wind River Range, she consistently is taking students up to Yellowstone, and they're thinking about, okay, like this is where a lot of your ancestors were hanging out, and this is what they're doing, and thinking about the role of bison, the role of wolves, and taking these kids to go see those things while also looking at, modern science and ecology, and thinking about ecological relationships as it also plays into some of like stories and those ideas. And so like I'm seeing pockets of this, and I think, oh, how awesome is that? And it is all so localized, and it's not something that is a national push. I'm so hopeful for public education because I think it's so important for so many people. And if we move away from it, then there are a lot of folks that are going to suffer and continue to suffer because it is so important for so many people. So I'm with you. I think like, crap, are we seeing the last gasps? But I'm really hopeful that it's not. And I'm really hopeful that we can latch on to these small examples and let teachers teach. Let them get out of the school. And this was kind of like, I don't know if this is a good shifting point, but I wanted to ask you, you talk a lot about space and the physical structure of learning. And I'm wondering, like in your mind, what would be the ideal? Like, how do we make education better with the physical space and with how we're thinking about the classroom?
Oh, wow. I don't know. I haven't thought about space per se. I've thought about systems, like living systems, people together in a space, wherever the space is, and what it means to pump energy between people in a way that allows the system of people to buzz, I was just talking to someone yesterday about at the edge of chaos, where the edge of chaos is the ideal place for a productive system to be. And I think of a classroom as a living system with nodes, individual students and the teacher, and lines in between them. And as I said, I'm interested in the lines between and pumping energy through so that everybody can feel alive and present and seen and heard and safe and contribute as they wish in the ways that they wish to. That's how I look at classrooms. And when I think about instructional design, again, I don't care where it happens. I don't care what space it's in, but good instructional design captures what a teacher wants students to be able to know, say, and do by the end. It's about how they are. It's about, I think of learning as change. How do we want our students to be changed so that they can do things that they couldn't do the day they started your class? That they can do and say and think things that they couldn't do, and that they know that they're aware of that. They're not just being dragged through so that they can't even appreciate the change that has come upon them. So to me, that means that schools, education, wherever, would be devoted to real and relevant, as you say, locally important learning and change and growth, which, I mean, if we were going to look at it, will be the same everywhere. If it's all about learning where I came from and learning who I am and appreciating my ancestors and the cultures that have formed me and the people who have formed me, that's the same for all of us. It's just going to look different depending on the locale. So that's what I think. I think teaching should be wall-less when it needs to be wall-less, and then it should have these walls with lovely spaces inside where kids want to be. I mean, imagine that, where they're comfortable and they feel at home and welcome and cared for, and where teachers have the space and time and self-confidence, and by that I mean where they can relax into just knowing how important they are without having to fix everybody or fix everything or be the perfect person, but where they can just relax into being themselves and be in relationship with those kids as they model for those kids the relationship with the content that they are expert in, right?
Yeah.
How to love this content. Oh my God, I'm so psyched to be here today because we're talking today about something that's wild. You're going to think it's crazy, but I know how important it is. And I've got a whole lesson here to take you from where you are, which is this is crazy, to no, this is just awesome. I want teachers to have the time and the space, the wherewithal, the support, the confidence to do that, because their kids will change. Their kids will become the people we need them to be.
Yeah. And I think, gosh, with all that, it feels like acquisition. The best learning is that acquisition of knowledge rather than, I think some people are like, oh, memorization is bad, but like there's a foundation of knowledge sometimes you need to have that.
Yeah, you need your multiplication tables.
Yeah, and you need the foundational, I'm thinking of science, like there are certain things you should know. Like if you're looking at ecology, you should know and be able to recite the different plants and species in your area. And there's a level of learning that. But in terms of acquiring that knowledge, sometimes I think that takes a space where, again, you can get into it, you can see the real things, and it feels relevant and applicable to your life. And I think some of what you're saying too, like that community, where's the applicability? How does this transition out of classroom, which is one of the biggest complaints for students right now, is that this doesn't feel relevant to my life. And
right, exactly.
So how do we make this stuff relevant and applicable to your lives outside of the classroom?
Yeah.
And I think to your point too, like whenever I help build curriculum, my biggest goal is I want teachers to be able to lean into their own expertise and their own little, quirks. And so I love the idea of like a framework, that you have a skeleton, that it's the teacher's responsibility to then put the meat on the bones.
Yep, exactly.
And I think that's where the localized could happen, is that we have this framework of you should be looking to blank local community. You should be looking to these folks in your spaces to get students in. It feels very like Freirean, create that third space where it's co-constructed with the students. And I think there's a lot of value in trying to model some of that in these spaces where, students feel invested, because it's them, it's their space, it's their identity, it's their community. And to feel like, how do they belong there? That'd be great.
And to be able to go meta. I mean, I'm thinking about, your frameworks, your structures, the kind of competencies or standardizations, like however we talk about it in whatever region of the country. I mean, I think about E.D. Hirsch and his cultural literacy. Like, who decides what everyone needs to know? But that's a problematic question. But I believe that at the very least, if a teacher can say to students, okay, these are the constraints we're working under. We need to know, these are the competencies or the standards that we have to meet. Let's go meta on this. Let's go meta on what these standards are, what they mean to us, what they mean to you, where you are on them now. And then let's watch ourselves get there. And let me just explain to you why I'm going to be asking you to do certain things to get there. Like, can we agree that we interpret this standard as you're going to be able to identify 25 different genuses and species or whatever of plants or birds in your neighborhood, in your home. That's what we're going to do. And this is why we're going to do it, because this standard is important for you. Like, let's talk about the importance of the standard. It's just this notion of going meta and joining with students on why it is that we're here at all. And then why it is that I'm asking you to do certain things, that it's not arbitrary. I'm not your taskmaster. I'm not draconian. I'm not like a torturer. This is, let's work on this together and agree that this is important stuff. If you can get students to agree that this is important, then they're going to be more likely to do, even if it's memorization.
Yeah. And I think that's so important, because like when you say draconian, I feel like there was a shift that education, like I think there's a joy in learning, an inherent joy in learning, but there's also struggle and failures is so important.
Exactly.
And it's hard to convince folks that if it's not bells and whistles,
Oh,
Go
I
ahead,
totally agree that the teachers need to support the struggle, because as a therapist once said to me, my favorite therapist, without struggle, you don't build character. Like, struggle is good. It has to be doable struggle.
Absolutely.
It can't be struggle that's impossible. So that's part of our job, is to kind of construct conditions that will allow students to struggle. But those conditions have to involve the support required for them to succeed.
Yeah.
Or feel some success from moment to moment.
And so much of that struggle is because of like graduation standards and saying, hey, we need to meet whatever percentage of graduation, then there is an inability sometimes for failure, or because students are they're not process driven, they're product driven. And rather than saying, no, trust the process. It's okay. Like, you are going to go through the process. Don't focus on the end. You'll get there. And, parents are in that same sort of like, we need the check marks. We need that final thing.
Exactly.
And as a coach, I coached wrestling, and as soon as we could get our team to focus only on the process, like, do not focus on the competition. Don't focus on the winning. It will come. Like, we're going to teach you how to be competitive in the room. We're going to make progress. We're going to slowly get there. And the athletes that could do that were almost always successful. Like, they were less worried about losing. They weren't worried about the winning and losing. They were worried about competing. And the next thing, like, ooh, can I get a takedown? Can I get more points than I did last match? And I think some of what you're saying too, this may be a jump. There's a cultural geographer. His name's E.C. Ralph. He's a Canadian geographer, and he pulled this term from somebody else, but I like how he described or talked about it. But it's this idea of Disneyfication, and it's this almost like neutering of culture to an extent, where we're going to make it the same everywhere. We're going to get rid of anything that's scary or anything that's challenging or anything that's offensive. And so this is why when you travel the world, you can get a cheeseburger from McDonald's. And so you have safety in this standardization. And I feel like
Yeah.
sometimes that's what our standardization is becoming, rather than like the regionalism that might be a little bit grittier, but it's definitely closer to the maybe authentic to that space. And I think of it as food. Like one of my favorite places to eat ever was in Ipswich, Massachusetts, right outside of Boston. They got this place
I
called
know
the
it.
Clam Box. Oh my God. It is just spectacular. And so why would I go to Boston or like Ipswich and eat McDonald's when I could get like these scallops that are the size of my fist? And oh my God, but also in
right.
Wyoming, it would be inauthentic for me to eat that same food. It would actually be a little bit sketchy because I don't know how long it was on a train. And but here I'm going to eat like steak or elk or something that we are very, very meat based. And so I think sometimes to education where I recognize what good food is, right? I recognize what good learning is, but it can look different depending on where you are.
Yeah. Oh, Charles, we've been talking about aspects of education that are demoralizing and forcing people out. And this feels like a good way to end, a good positive note to end on, given that we have to end. And it probably would be better if we didn't, if we just kept talking forever and ever.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, I could.
Yeah.
It's lovely speaking with you.
Oh, it's so good to
It's
talk
so
to
great
you.
hearing your perspectives. And also, your perspectives are not the same as mine. Even though I think we're both really progressive educators, they're not exactly the same. So I think it's really fun to be able to hear, like, yeah, there is something to be said for structure or frames and facts and getting that all right. I would never disagree with that, but I wouldn't necessarily push. That wouldn't be like where I would go.
Right.
I've loved it. I've loved hearing your perspectives.
And I think it's so important to have different perspectives. And I think that's what's lacking is that there's a thought that everyone needs to think the same about education.
Yeah.
And I think the structure is such that there's an expectation that that's the case, but I think it's important that we have the difference. And I think some of my leaning towards structure is seeing places that want to get rid of things that are factual. They want to get rid of history. They want to get rid of science. And so I'm saying, when I talk to my wife, she's like, oh, hey, you can't, like, we have to still be able to teach evolution. We still have to be able to teach like biology that deals with gender, that deals with sexes, that deals with, how things reproduce. Because then you end up in places like we were taught in a place where a student had approached my wife, who was the biology teacher, and said, how come sometimes when you have sex, you get pregnant, sometimes you don't? And so my wife was like, okay, we're going to have a biology lesson. And that was a town that had a lot of teen pregnancy and a lot of just folks didn't know.
Did she get pushback?
I don't think it left the classroom.
Oh, wow.
And so
Good
that
for the
student,
kids.
the kids were thankful. And and it's when I think of the structure and the facts, it's because I'm seeing, like we said earlier, the push against things that have been proven or things that are the capital T truths or just like history. We can't disregard the fact that things happened.
Yes, they did happen. We certainly can interpret. I mean, it's really rare for me to be just dumbfounded, but I guess I just assume. I do assume that facts are facts, but again, that's not what I talk to teachers about a lot.
Yeah.
You've experienced these ways in which parents and I guess school committees are questioning
legislation
the validity of facts and legislation. I mean, well, we know it's coming from the
Yeah.
top, but I haven't encountered this in actual schools that I'm working with, which it's freakish.
Yeah. Can I recommend a podcast just on that topic that I think does a great job?
Please.
So there's a podcast called Teaching Texas, and it came out a little bit ago, but they're looking at the textbook industry and how so much of it is based in Texas and how it's essentially like there are certain folks that can dictate, what is
Correct.
available and taught. And so this podcast does a great job of exploring how some things might get cut out.
Oh, yes. And how they're presented, how they're interpreted.
Oh, absolutely.
Yes. It's a huge industry that has a death grip on classrooms.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you for that recommendation.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hear ye, and I'm going to check it out. Well, Charles, thank you again. You're awesome.
Thank you so much. I could talk to you forever. This is great.
Me too. I could too. I mean, I'm going to have to travel to Wyoming and visit my roots.
Let me know.
Well, so thank you so much and best of luck to you. And I really do also want to recommend Charles's both seasons of Those Who Can't Teach Anymore. Links to all of these will be in the show notes. So
Awesome.
I hope listeners go check these out too. So please, if you liked what you've heard, subscribe to this podcast and leave a review on your podcast app, letting others know what you like about it. It really helps. I know you know that.
Great. Well, so good talking to you.
So
Thanks for
good
having me
talking
on.
to you. Best of luck to you, and I hope to stay in touch.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, no doubt.
I I want to thank the teacher whose story we just told or who consented to be interviewed for their generosity and wisdom and commitment to teaching greatly. You rock. Here are a few more people who rock. Joe Johnson, of course, my super fun and thoughtful co-host. My endlessly patient and talented producer and creative thought partner, Julian Andrukaya. My buoying and brilliant audience development partner, Andrea Koskai. My brother, Tom Burris, whose song Lifetime, from his amazing album Jabbering Trout, ushers us into and out of Teaching Through Emotions. And my astute script editor and creative genius, Brad Wells. Thank you one and all. Run to the Teaching Through Emotions Substack right now to find all my writing, my podcast, newsletter, and more. That's teachingthroughemotions.com. Subscribe. Get my stuff in your inbox automatically. Great! If you are a teacher with a story, I'd love to hear it. Contact me directly and confidentially by either going to my Substack and clicking on Share a Story, or by calling 413-239-4158 and leaving a voicemail message. Honestly, I'd love to hear from you. I might even put your story on the podcast. And check out the show notes below for how to access my resources. I mean it. Suffering in silence gets you nowhere. Telling your story is the first step towards understanding and relief. Contact me. Chew through and pop those terrible teaching emotions. You will feel better.
It's all true.